Question 1. Which approach would be most appropriate for a financial advisor when a client expresses a strong desire to invest in a particular high-risk, speculative product that has recently gained significant media attention, but this product does not align with the client's stated conservative risk tolerance and long-term financial goals? Option A. Gently dissuade the client from the speculative product by explaining its high risk and lack of alignment with their established financial plan, offering alternative, more suitable investment options that still offer growth potential. Option B. Recommend the product enthusiastically, highlighting its potential for rapid gains and downplaying the associated risks to satisfy the client's immediate interest. Option C. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, ensuring all necessary paperwork is completed, assuming the client is fully aware of the risks involved and has made their own informed decision. Option D. Suggest a small allocation to the speculative product as a trial, without thoroughly reassessing the client's overall risk profile or long-term objectives, to appease the client's immediate desire. Correct answer is B. Recommend the product enthusiastically, highlighting its potential for rapid gains and downplaying the associated risks to satisfy the client's immediate interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial needs of a client with the long-term implications of investment decisions, all while adhering to the strict regulatory framework governing financial advice. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that recommendations are suitable and in the client's best interest, not just their own or the firm's. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresenting risks or making recommendations based on incomplete information. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives before recommending any product. This aligns with the core principles of client-centric advice mandated by regulatory bodies. Specifically, it adheres to the duty of care and the requirement to act in the client's best interest, ensuring that all recommendations are suitable and appropriate for their individual circumstances. This proactive and client-focused methodology is the bedrock of ethical and compliant financial advisory practice. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate commission or sales targets over client suitability would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to mis-selling, breaches of fiduciary duty, and ultimately, harm to the client. Another incorrect approach, such as recommending a product solely based on its perceived popularity or a superficial understanding of its features, without a deep dive into its alignment with the client's specific needs and risk profile, would also constitute a failure to exercise due diligence and act in the client's best interest. Recommending a product without fully disclosing all associated fees, risks, and potential conflicts of interest would violate transparency requirements and erode client trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's complete financial picture and objectives. This is followed by a rigorous evaluation of available products against those needs, considering all associated risks and costs. Transparency and clear communication with the client throughout the process are paramount. If at any point a recommendation feels pressured or misaligned with the client's best interests, the professional must pause, reevaluate, and seek further clarification or alternative solutions, always prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Question 2. Implementation of a new client onboarding process at AFI Business School's affiliated financial services firm is underway. The firm is experiencing significant growth and faces pressure to onboard new clients quickly to meet ambitious revenue targets. The proposed process includes a tiered approach to due diligence, where clients deemed high value receive a streamlined verification process, while others undergo a more extensive review. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations for financial institutions? Option A. Prioritize onboarding high-value clients with a significantly expedited and less rigorous due diligence process to maximize immediate revenue generation, while applying a more thorough process to other clients. Option B. Delegate the entire due diligence process to junior compliance officers, trusting their judgment to identify any significant risks without requiring extensive senior management oversight or formal training on evolving regulatory requirements. Option C. Implement a risk-based due diligence process that applies a consistent, albeit potentially varied in intensity, level of scrutiny to all prospective clients, with clear criteria for escalating enhanced due diligence based on objective risk factors, and ensuring adequate training and oversight for all staff involved in onboarding. Option D. Rely primarily on publicly available information for client verification, assuming that most clients will be legitimate, and only conduct deeper investigations if specific red flags are immediately apparent. The correct answer is C. Implement a risk-based due diligence process that applies a consistent, albeit potentially varied in intensity, level of scrutiny to all prospective clients, with clear criteria for escalating enhanced due diligence based on objective risk factors, and ensuring adequate training and oversight for all staff involved in onboarding. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a firm's desire to expand its client base and the regulatory obligation to conduct thorough due diligence. The AFI Business School entrance exam, in its regulatory framework, emphasizes the importance of adhering to anti-money laundering (AML) and Know Your Customer (KIC) regulations. These regulations are designed to prevent financial institutions from being used for illicit purposes. A superficial approach to client onboarding, driven by commercial pressures, risks significant regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and potential legal penalties. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with these critical compliance duties. The correct approach involves a robust and systematic due diligence process that is applied consistently to all prospective clients, regardless of their perceived value or the urgency of onboarding. This includes verifying the identity of the client and beneficial owners, understanding the nature of their business, and assessing the risk of money laundering or terrorist financing. This approach is ethically sound and legally mandated by the regulatory framework governing financial institutions, which prioritizes the integrity of the financial system. An approach that prioritizes speed and volume over thoroughness is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This failure stems from a disregard for the fundamental principles of AML/KYC, which are designed to identify and mitigate risks. Specifically, it violates the regulatory requirement for adequate customer due diligence, potentially exposing the firm to facilitating financial crime. Another incorrect approach, which involves relying solely on publicly available information without further verification, is also insufficient. While public information can be a starting point, it is rarely enough to establish a comprehensive understanding of a client's risk profile or to identify ultimate beneficial owners, thereby failing to meet the Know Your Customer standard. A third incorrect approach, which delegates the entire due diligence process to junior staff without adequate oversight or training, is problematic. This not only risks errors due to inexperience, but also represents a failure in the firm's internal control framework and its responsibility to ensure compliance. Effective oversight and training are crucial components of a compliant due diligence program. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and the firm's specific compliance obligations. This should be followed by a risk-based assessment of potential clients, ensuring that the due diligence process is proportionate to the identified risks. Regular training, clear internal policies, and robust oversight mechanisms are essential to support this process and to foster a culture of compliance. When faced with commercial pressures, professionals must prioritize regulatory adherence, escalating concerns if necessary to ensure that compliance is not compromised. Question 3. The efficiency study reveals that significant cost savings can be achieved by reducing employee benefits and outsourcing certain customer support functions to regions with lower labor costs. From a stakeholder perspective, which of the following actions best aligns with the principles expected of a responsible business operating within the regulatory framework of the AFI Business School's jurisdiction? Option A. Negotiate with employees to significantly reduce their benefits, arguing that this is necessary for the company's survival, without considering alternative cost reduction strategies. Option B. Implement the proposed cost-saving measures immediately to maximize short-term profitability and shareholder value, as this is the primary fiduciary duty of management. Option C. Proceed with outsourcing customer support without fully investigating the implications for data privacy and service quality, focusing solely on the immediate cost reduction. Option D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the proposed changes on all stakeholders, including employees, customers, and the company's long-term reputation. seeking alternative efficiencies that do not compromise ethical standards or regulatory compliance. The correct answer is B. Implement the proposed cost-saving measures immediately to maximize short-term profitability and shareholder value, as this is the primary fiduciary duty of management. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a business with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The AFI Business School entrance exam likely assesses a candidate's understanding of how to navigate such conflicts, particularly concerning stakeholder interests and compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions, while aiming for efficiency, do not violate established principles or legal frameworks. The correct approach involves prioritizing the interests of all stakeholders, including employees, customers, and the wider community, in line with the regulatory framework governing business operations. This approach recognizes that sustainable business success is built on trust and adherence to ethical standards, which are often codified in regulations. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of corporate social responsibility and good governance, which are implicitly or explicitly part of business school curricula and professional expectations. By considering the broader impact of cost-cutting measures, this approach ensures compliance with regulations that may protect employee rights, consumer safety, or environmental standards, thereby avoiding potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing short-term shareholder profit by disregarding employee well-being would fail to meet regulatory requirements concerning fair labor practices and workplace safety. Such a failure could lead to legal penalties, employee dissatisfaction, and reduced productivity. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction by compromising product quality or customer service would violate consumer protection laws and damage the company's reputation, leading to a loss of customer trust and potential legal action. A third incorrect approach that involves circumventing environmental regulations to reduce operational costs would expose the company to significant fines, legal liabilities, and severe reputational damage, undermining long-term viability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. This should be followed by an assessment of potential decisions against the applicable regulatory framework and ethical principles. When conflicts arise, the framework should guide towards solutions that achieve business objectives while upholding legal and ethical standards, often involving seeking expert advice or exploring alternative, compliance strategies. Question 4. During the evaluation of a significant donation proposal from a long-standing and influential donor, the AFI Business School's leadership team is presented with a project idea that, while financially attractive to the donor, appears to have limited strategic alignment with the school's core academic mission and may divert resources from other critical initiatives. The donor has expressed a strong personal interest in seeing this project funded and implemented quickly. What is the most professionally responsible approach for the school's leadership to take? Option A. Immediately approve the project to maintain a positive relationship with the influential donor and secure the funding, assuming the donor's judgment is sound given their past contributions. Option B. Expedite the project's approval process by accepting the donor's assurances of its value and potential, and proceed with implementation to demonstrate responsiveness to a key stakeholder. Option C. Conduct a thorough, objective assessment of the project's strategic fit, financial viability, and potential impact on the school's overall mission and other priorities, while maintaining transparent communication with the donor throughout the process regarding the evaluation criteria and potential outcomes. Option D. Postpone any decision on the project indefinitely until a more opportune time, to avoid potentially disappointing the donor or creating internal conflict, and focus on other pressing institutional matters. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, objective assessment of the project's strategic fit, financial viability, and potential impact on the school's overall mission and other priorities, while maintaining transparent communication with the donor throughout the process regarding the evaluation criteria and potential outcomes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial needs of a key stakeholder with the long-term fiduciary duties owed to all stakeholders and the regulatory requirements of the AFI Business School. Misjudging this balance could lead to regulatory breaches, damage to the school's reputation, and erosion of trust among its constituents. The pressure from a significant donor introduces a personal element that can cloud objective decision-making. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the proposed project's viability and alignment with the school's strategic objectives, while also engaging in transparent communication with the donor about the process and potential outcomes. This upholds the principle of acting in the best interests of the institution as a whole, adhering to governance best practices, and maintaining ethical fundraising standards. It ensures that decisions are driven by merit and strategic fit, not solely by the influence of a single stakeholder. This aligns with general principles of good governance and ethical financial management expected of educational institutions. Incorrect approach is analysis. Prioritizing the donor's immediate request without due diligence fails to uphold the fiduciary duty to the institution and its broader stakeholder base. This approach risks misallocating resources, investing in projects that do not serve the school's long-term mission, and potentially violating internal policies or external regulations governing the use of funds. It also sets a dangerous precedent for future donor interactions, suggesting that influence can override objective decision-making. Accepting the project solely to appease the donor, even with a superficial review, is ethically problematic. It bypasses the necessary scrutiny that ensures responsible stewardship of institutional assets and could lead to reputational damage if the project proves unsuccessful or misaligned with the school's values. This approach prioritizes relationship management over institutional integrity. Delaying a decision indefinitely without clear communication or a defined process is also professionally unsound. It creates uncertainty for both the donor and the institution, potentially damaging the relationship and hindering progress on other important initiatives. It fails to demonstrate proactive and responsible governance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly identifying all stakeholders and their interests. 2. Understanding the relevant institutional policies, governance frameworks, and any applicable external guidelines for fundraising and project approval. 3. Conducting a comprehensive, objective evaluation of the proposal based on predefined criteria, e.g., strategic alignment, financial viability, impact. 4. Engaging in open and honest communication with all parties, managing expectations transparently. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind the final outcome. This systematic approach ensures accountability, fairness, and adherence to ethical and regulatory standards. Question 5. System analysis indicates that a new, high-profile client is eager to onboard with AFI Business School's investment services, promising substantial future business. The client has provided initial documentation, but the compliance department has flagged a few minor inconsistencies requiring further clarification. The relationship manager, keen to secure this lucrative account, is considering proceeding with onboarding while promising to resolve the minor issues later to avoid delaying the client. Which approach best upholds the regulatory framework and ethical standards for AFI Business School? Option A. Delegate the task of resolving the documentation inconsistencies to a junior compliance officer, trusting their judgment to handle the matter efficiently without further senior oversight. Option B. Proceed with onboarding the client immediately, assuring them that any minor documentation discrepancies will be rectified promptly after account activation to secure the business relationship. Option C. Accept the client's verbal assurances that the inconsistencies are minor and will be corrected, and proceed with onboarding while noting the pending resolution in the client file. Option D. Halt the onboarding process until all inconsistencies in the client's documentation are thoroughly investigated and satisfactorily resolved, in accordance with established Know Your Customer (KIC) and anti-money laundering (AML) policies. The correct answer is B. Proceed with onboarding the client immediately, assuring them that any minor documentation discrepancies will be rectified promptly after account activation to secure the business relationship. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a firm's desire to secure new business and the regulatory obligation to conduct thorough due diligence. The pressure to onboard a new client quickly, especially one with significant potential revenue, can lead to shortcuts that compromise compliance. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial interests with the non-negotiable requirements of regulatory frameworks designed to prevent financial crime and maintain market integrity. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance by conducting comprehensive Know Your Customer (KYC) and anti-money laundering (AML) checks before onboarding the client. This aligns with the fundamental principles of financial regulation, which mandate that financial institutions understand their clients and the nature of their business to mitigate risks. Specifically, this approach adheres to the spirit and letter of regulations that require robust due diligence to prevent the facilitation of illicit activities. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and responsible business practices, safeguarding both the institution and the broader financial system. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately performs due diligence is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates regulatory mandates. Such actions expose the firm to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and potential sanctions for facilitating financial crime. Failing to identify the true beneficial owners or the source of funds, for instance, can lead to the firm being used for money laundering or terrorist financing, which carries severe consequences under relevant financial crime legislation. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on the client's assurances without independent verification is also flawed. While client cooperation is important, regulatory frameworks demand independent verification of information provided by clients. Relying solely on assurances, especially from a new and potentially high-value client, creates a blind spot that criminals can exploit. This approach fails to meet the standard of reasonable care expected of financial professionals and can be interpreted as willful blindness to potential risks. A third incorrect approach that delegates the entire due diligence process to a junior staff member without adequate oversight or training is also problematic. While delegation is a management tool, ultimate responsibility for compliance rests with the firm and its senior management. Inadequate supervision can lead to errors or omissions in the due diligence process, which can have the same detrimental consequences as intentionally bypassing checks. It demonstrates a failure in internal controls and risk management. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the firm's regulatory obligations, a robust risk assessment framework, and a commitment to a culture of compliance. When faced with pressure to expedite client onboarding, professionals should 1. Identify the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the client and the transaction. 2. Assess the risks associated with the client and their proposed activities. 3. Ensure that all necessary due diligence procedures are completed thoroughly and documented appropriately, regardless of commercial pressures. 4. Escalate any concerns or potential red flags to senior management or the compliance department for further review. 5. Prioritize compliance over short-term commercial gains, recognizing that long-term sustainability depends on maintaining regulatory adherence and a strong reputation. Question 6. Performance analysis shows that AFI Business School is facing a significant shortfall in its enrollment targets for the upcoming academic year. The head of admissions is under pressure to fill the remaining places quickly. Considering the school's commitment to academic excellence and fair admissions, which of the following approaches best aligns with professional and ethical standards for managing this situation? Option A. Offer conditional admissions with significantly reduced academic requirements to a broader pool of applicants, with the understanding that these conditions will be reviewed after the first semester. Option B. Expedite the admission of applicants who have indicated a strong ability to pay tuition fees or have connections to influential individuals, even if their academic profiles are slightly below the usual threshold, to meet enrollment numbers. Option C. Create a discretionary fast-track admission process for a limited number of applicants who can demonstrate significant financial sponsorship or strong personal recommendations, bypassing some standard evaluation steps. Option D. Systematically review all remaining qualified applicants based on the established admissions criteria, prioritizing those who demonstrate the strongest academic potential and fit with the school's programs, while also exploring enhanced recruitment strategies for future cycles. The correct answer is D. Systematically review all remaining qualified applicants based on the established admissions criteria, prioritizing those who demonstrate the strongest academic potential and fit with the school's programs, while also exploring enhanced recruitment strategies for future cycles. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the head of admissions must balance the immediate need to fill places with the long-term integrity of the admissions process and the school's reputation. The pressure to meet enrollment targets can lead to compromises that violate ethical principles and potentially regulatory guidelines, even if not explicitly codified in a criminal statute. Careful judgment is required to uphold the school's standards while addressing enrollment shortfalls. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective review of all applicants based on the established admissions criteria, regardless of their perceived ability to pay or their connections. This upholds the principle of meritocracy and fairness, which are foundational to academic institutions. It ensures that decisions are based on qualifications and potential contribution to the school, not on external factors that could be construed as preferential treatment or a deviation from stated policies. This aligns with the ethical obligation to maintain transparency and impartiality in all institutional processes, which is implicitly expected of educational bodies and crucial for maintaining stakeholder trust. An incorrect approach that prioritizes filling places by admitting less qualified candidates based on their perceived ability to pay or their connections would be professionally unacceptable. This action undermines the academic standards of AFI Business School and could lead to a decline in the quality of its student body and graduates. It also creates an unfair advantage for some applicants over others who may be more academically deserving, violating principles of equity. Furthermore, such a practice could be seen as a breach of trust with prospective students, faculty, and the wider community who expect a rigorous and fair admissions process. Another incorrect approach that involves creating a special category for applicants with financial means or connections outside the standard admissions criteria is also professionally unsound. This introduces bias and opacity into the admissions process. It suggests that the school is willing to bend its rules for certain individuals, which erodes the credibility of its admission standards and can lead to accusations of favoritism or even corruption. This approach fails to adhere to the fundamental ethical duty of treating all applicants equally and transparently. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Clearly define the problem. Enrollment targets are not being met. 2. Identify all relevant stakeholders and their interests: prospective students, current students, faculty, alumni, administration, and the wider community. 3. Review existing policies and ethical guidelines. Ensure all decisions are made in accordance with AFI Business School's stated admissions criteria and ethical codes. 4. Explore all legitimate options for addressing the enrollment shortfall. This could include enhanced recruitment efforts, targeted outreach to qualified but undecided applicants, or reviewing the attractiveness of the program offerings. 5. Evaluate each option against ethical principles and institutional values. Prioritize fairness, transparency, and academic integrity. 6. Consult with relevant committees or senior leadership. Seek advice and ensure alignment with institutional strategy. 7. Make a decision based on a holistic assessment of all factors, prioritizing long-term institutional health and reputation over short-term gains. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that a significant portion of investment professionals may face situations where they are privy to or are offered material non-public information. Imagine you are attending a social gathering and an acquaintance, who works in a different department of a publicly traded company, casually mentions upcoming, unannounced positive earnings that are significantly above market expectations. This information is not yet public. What is the most appropriate professional response? Option A. Politely disengage from the conversation and avoid further discussion about the company's performance or any other sensitive topics. Option B. Inquire further about the details of the earnings report to better understand the magnitude of the positive news. Option C. Express gratitude for the information and immediately begin researching the company to prepare for a potential investment. Option D. Advise the acquaintance that they should not be sharing such information, and then immediately report the conversation to the relevant regulatory body. The correct answer is A. Politely disengage from the conversation and avoid further discussion about the company's performance or any other sensitive topics. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect client confidentiality and ensure fair market practices. The pressure to gain a competitive edge can tempt individuals to seek or disseminate non-public information, which is strictly prohibited. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests without violating professional standards or legal requirements. The correct approach involves refraining from seeking or acting upon material non-public information. This upholds the principles of fair dealing and market integrity, which are fundamental to professional conduct in the financial industry. Specifically, it aligns with the ethical guidelines that prohibit the misuse of confidential information for personal gain or to disadvantage other market participants. This approach ensures that all investment decisions are based on publicly available information, promoting a level playing field. An incorrect approach would be to solicit or accept the information from the acquaintance. This action directly violates regulations and ethical codes that prohibit the use of material non-public information. Such behavior constitutes insider trading or tipping, which carries severe legal penalties and professional sanctions, including reputational damage and loss of licenses. It undermines market confidence and fairness. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately report the acquaintance to regulatory authorities without first assessing the nature and materiality of the information. While reporting potential misconduct is important, a premature report without proper verification could lead to unwarranted accusations and damage to an individual's reputation. The professional decision-making process should involve a careful assessment of the information's materiality and non-public nature, followed by appropriate action, which may include internal reporting or seeking guidance from compliance departments, rather than immediate external reporting of an unverified tip. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing the potential for unethical or illegal behavior. 2. Understanding the relevant regulations and ethical codes. 3. Assessing the nature of the information in question. Is it material and non-public? 4. Consulting with compliance officers or legal counsel when in doubt. 5. Acting with integrity and transparency, always prioritizing the fair and orderly functioning of the markets. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates that a financial advisor is working with a client who has expressed a strong preference for investing in a specific, highly speculative sector, despite the advisor's assessment that this allocation significantly increases the client's overall portfolio risk beyond their stated risk tolerance. The client has been insistent on this allocation, citing anecdotal evidence and personal conviction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their preference, clearly explain the associated risks and potential downsides of their preferred allocation, present alternative strategies that align with their stated goals but offer a more balanced risk profile, and document the entire conversation and the final agreed-upon strategy. Option B. Implement the client's preferred allocation immediately without further discussion, assuming the client understands the risks. Option C. Proceed with the client's preferred allocation, documenting the client's explicit instruction and the advisor's concerns about increased risk. Option D. Refuse to implement the client's preferred allocation and unilaterally implement a more conservative strategy that the advisor deems suitable. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the client's preferred allocation, documenting the client's explicit instruction and the advisor's concerns about increased risk. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when those preferences might lead to suboptimal outcomes or expose the client to undue risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance, ensuring compliance with regulatory standards while maintaining client trust and providing sound financial guidance. The pressure to retain a client can sometimes cloud judgment, making adherence to ethical principles paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their preferences. This includes explaining the potential implications of their choices, such as increased risk, lower potential returns, or higher fees, in a clear and understandable manner. The advisor must then present alternative strategies that align with the client's stated goals, but are more suitable from a risk-return perspective, adhering to the principle of suitability and the fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. This approach prioritizes client education and informed consent, ensuring that any decision made is a joint one, grounded in a comprehensive understanding of the financial landscape and regulatory requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement the client's preferred strategy without further inquiry or explanation. This fails to uphold the fiduciary duty, as it prioritizes client instruction over the advisor's professional judgment and responsibility to ensure suitability. It also bypasses the crucial step of client education, leaving the client potentially unaware of the risks or downsides of their chosen path. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's preferences outright and unilaterally impose the advisor's own recommended strategy. This demonstrates a lack of respect for the client's autonomy and can damage the client-advisor relationship. While the advisor may believe their strategy is superior, forcing it upon the client without collaborative discussion and understanding is unprofessional and potentially violates principles of client-centric advice. A third incorrect approach would be to agree to the client's preferred strategy while internally believing it is unsuitable, without any attempt to document the discussion or the advisor's concerns. This creates a significant compliance risk and an ethical breach, as it suggests a lack of due diligence and a failure to act in the client's best interest, even if the client has technically given their consent. The lack of documentation also leaves the advisor vulnerable should the investment perform poorly. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's objectives and risk tolerance. This is followed by an assessment of the suitability of any proposed strategy against these parameters and relevant regulatory guidelines. When a client's preferences diverge from what is deemed suitable, the professional must engage in a transparent and educational dialogue, clearly articulating the pros and cons of different options. The ultimate decision should be a collaborative one, with all discussions and rationale thoroughly documented to ensure accountability and compliance. Question 9. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client who has previously expressed a strong aversion to market volatility is now requesting a significant allocation to a highly speculative, illiquid asset class that carries substantial risk and is not typically recommended for investors with their stated profile. The advisor has conducted preliminary research and believes this investment is unsuitable given the client's risk tolerance and financial objectives. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Proceed with the client's requested allocation, as the client's instructions are paramount and the advisor's role is to execute their wishes. Option B. Politely decline the client's request, explaining that the advisor cannot recommend such a high-risk investment due to their professional obligations. Option C. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the underlying reasons for their request, clearly explain the risks and potential consequences of the proposed investment, and present alternative strategies that align with their stated goals and risk tolerance, while documenting the entire process. Option D. Advise the client to seek a second opinion from another advisor who may be more willing to accommodate their investment preferences. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the client's requested allocation, as the client's instructions are paramount and the advisor's role is to execute their wishes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when those preferences might lead to suboptimal outcomes or expose the client to undue risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance, ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements while maintaining client trust and delivering sound financial advice. Careful judgment is required to avoid misinterpretations of client intent and to uphold ethical standards. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client to understand the underlying reasons for their stated preference. This includes exploring their risk tolerance, financial goals, and any specific concerns driving their request. The advisor must then clearly articulate the potential implications of their preferred course of action, including any deviations from standard best practices or regulatory guidelines, and present alternative strategies that align with their goals while adhering to fiduciary responsibilities. This approach ensures that the client is fully informed, their autonomy is respected, and the advisor fulfills their duty of care and loyalty, as mandated by principles of professional conduct and any applicable financial advisory regulations. An incorrect approach would be to blindly follow the client's instruction without further inquiry. This fails to uphold the advisor's fiduciary duty, which requires acting in the client's best interest, not merely their stated preference if that preference is detrimental. It also risks regulatory scrutiny for failing to exercise due diligence and provide appropriate advice. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's preference outright without attempting to understand their rationale. This can damage the client relationship and may overlook valid concerns the client has, even if their proposed solution is not ideal. Finally, agreeing to the client's request while failing to document the discussion and the rationale for proceeding would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure, leaving both the client and the advisor exposed. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes understanding the client's needs and goals, assessing the suitability and risks of proposed actions, clearly communicating these assessments to the client, and documenting all advice and decisions. This process should always be guided by regulatory requirements and ethical principles, ensuring that client interests are paramount. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client who has previously expressed a conservative risk tolerance and a goal of capital preservation is now strongly advocating for a highly speculative investment strategy that carries significant potential for rapid losses. As a financial advisor bound by the regulatory framework of the AFI Business School's jurisdiction, which of the following represents the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Immediately implement the client's preferred speculative investment strategy, as the client's instructions must be followed without question to maintain client satisfaction. Option B. Proceed with the speculative investment strategy, but only after obtaining a signed waiver from the client acknowledging the high risks involved, without further discussion of alternatives. Option C. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the reasons behind their shift in preference, clearly explain the risks associated with the speculative strategy, present alternative strategies that better align with their stated goals, and document the entire conversation and the client's final decision. Option D. Politely decline to advise on the speculative strategy and suggest the client seek advice from another advisor who specializes in high-risk investments. The correct answer is C. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the reasons behind their shift in preference, clearly explain the risks associated with the speculative strategy, present alternative strategies that better align with their stated goals, and document the entire conversation and the client's final decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when those preferences might lead to suboptimal outcomes or expose the client to undue risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance, ensuring transparency and client understanding while upholding professional standards. The pressure to retain a client or secure a commission can create an ethical dilemma, requiring a robust decision-making process grounded in regulatory compliance and ethical principles. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client about the risks and benefits of their preferred investment strategy, clearly outlining why it may not align with their stated financial goals or risk tolerance. This approach prioritizes the client's best interests, fulfilling the fiduciary duty mandated by regulatory frameworks. It requires the advisor to educate the client, present alternative, more suitable options, and obtain informed consent for any decision made. This aligns with the principles of suitability and client protection, ensuring that recommendations are appropriate and that the client understands the implications of their choices. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's preferred strategy without adequately addressing the potential downsides or exploring alternatives. This fails to uphold the fiduciary duty, as it prioritizes the client's immediate request over their long-term financial well-being and potentially exposes them to unacceptable risks. It also bypasses the crucial step of ensuring informed consent, which is a cornerstone of ethical client advisory. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's preferences outright and unilaterally impose a different strategy without sufficient explanation or client buy-in. This demonstrates a lack of respect for the client's autonomy and can damage the professional relationship. While the advisor may believe they are acting in the client's best interest, the failure to engage in a collaborative discussion and secure understanding makes this approach professionally unsound and potentially a breach of client communication standards. A third incorrect approach would be to recommend a strategy that, while seemingly aligned with the client's stated preference, is actually driven by the advisor's personal gain, e.g., higher commission, rather than the client's best interests. This constitutes a conflict of interest and a violation of ethical obligations, as it prioritizes the advisor's benefit over the client's. Transparency and disclosure of any potential conflicts are paramount. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the client's objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation. This is followed by an assessment of potential investment strategies, evaluating their suitability and alignment with the client's profile. When a client's preference diverges from a suitable recommendation, the professional must engage in open, honest, and documented communication, explaining the rationale behind their advice and exploring the implications of the client's preferred course of action. The ultimate decision should be a collaborative one, based on informed consent and a clear understanding of all risks and benefits, always prioritizing the client's best interests as mandated by regulatory and ethical guidelines. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that a client, Mr. Henderson, has expressed a strong desire to invest a significant portion of his portfolio in a highly speculative, a liquid asset class that carries substantial risk of capital loss. While Mr. Henderson is aware of the risks, he emphasizes his belief that this asset class will provide exceptional returns and is willing to accept the potential for total loss. As an advisor operating under the AFI Business School's regulatory framework, which emphasizes client best interest and suitability, how should you proceed? Option A. Decline the investment outright, informing Mr. Henderson that it is too risky and that you cannot, in good conscience or under regulatory guidelines, facilitate such a transaction. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with Mr. Henderson to thoroughly explain the risks and potential downsides of the proposed investment, explore alternative investment strategies that align with his stated return objectives, but with a more appropriate risk profile, and document the entire conversation and the rationale for any agreed-upon course of action. Option C. Proceed with the investment as requested by Mr. Henderson, documenting his explicit acknowledgement of the risks and his desire to proceed despite potential total loss. Option D. Recommend a smaller, more diversified allocation to the speculative asset class, balancing his desire for high returns with a more prudent risk management approach, without extensively detailing the risks of the specific asset class itself. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the investment as requested by Mr. Henderson, documenting his explicit acknowledgement of the risks and his desire to proceed despite potential total loss. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when those preferences might lead to suboptimal outcomes or regulatory breaches. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance, ensuring transparency, client understanding, and adherence to regulatory standards. The correct approach involves a thorough, client-centric discussion that educates the client on the implications of their preferences, explores alternative solutions that align with their goals while respecting regulatory boundaries, and documents the rationale for any agreed-upon course of action. This upholds the advisor's fiduciary duty by prioritizing the client's long-term well-being and compliance with the regulatory framework. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of client suitability and the duty to provide advice that is in the client's best interest, as mandated by the regulatory framework governing financial advisory services. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on fulfilling the client's immediate, potentially ill-advised request without adequate explanation or exploration of alternatives fails to meet the fiduciary standard. This could lead to regulatory sanctions for failing to act in the client's best interest or for providing unsuitable advice. Another incorrect approach, which involves unilaterally disregarding the client's wishes and imposing a different strategy without proper consultation, undermines client autonomy and trust, potentially leading to complaints and reputational damage, and may also violate principles of client engagement and informed consent. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives and risk tolerance. This is followed by an assessment of regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. The professional then develops suitable recommendations, clearly communicates the rationale and potential consequences of each option to the client, and seeks informed consent before proceeding. Documentation of all discussions and decisions is crucial for accountability and compliance. Question 12. Investigation of a financial advisor's action reveals that they are recommending a specific mutual fund to multiple clients. Unbeknownst to the clients, the advisor has recently been offered a personal bonus by the fund management company if they can significantly increase the fund's assets under management within the next quarter. The advisor believes this fund is genuinely a good investment for their clients, but the personal incentive creates a potential conflict of interest. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible and ethically sound course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to the firm's compliance department and seek guidance on how to proceed, potentially including disclosure to clients or recusal from recommending this specific fund. Option B. Subtly emphasize the fund's strengths to clients while downplaying any potential risks, without explicitly mentioning the personal incentive. Option C. Proceed with recommending the fund to clients, assuming the investment is genuinely suitable, and hope the personal bonus does not influence their decision-making. Option D. Inform the clients that they will no longer be advising them on this particular investment, without explaining the specific reason for the change in approach. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to the firm's compliance department and seek guidance on how to proceed, potentially including disclosure to clients or recusal from recommending this specific fund. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a firm's duty to its clients and the potential for personal gain by an employee. The need for careful judgment arises from the obligation to maintain client confidentiality, avoid conflicts of interest, and uphold the integrity of financial advice. The AFI Business School entrance exam emphasizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance in financial services. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the compliance department and seeking guidance. This demonstrates adherence to the firm's internal policies and regulatory requirements concerning conflicts of interest. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of acting in the client's best interest and maintaining transparency, which are foundational to ethical financial advisory practice. Regulatory frameworks typically mandate such disclosure to allow the firm to manage or mitigate the conflict, ensuring that client decisions are not influenced by personal interests of advisors. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the recommendation without disclosure, hoping the investment performs well. This fails to address the conflict of interest proactively and breaches the duty of loyalty to the client. Ethically, it prioritizes personal gain over client welfare, and regulatorily, it violates rules against undisclosed conflicts of interest, potentially leading to disciplinary action and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly steer the client towards the investment without explicit disclosure, perhaps by highlighting only its positive aspects. This is a form of misrepresentation and a failure to provide balanced advice. It undermines the client's ability to make an informed decision and constitutes a serious ethical and regulatory breach, as it involves deception. A further incorrect approach would be to withdraw from advising the client on this specific investment without informing the client or the compliance department about the underlying reason. While it avoids direct involvement, it fails to fulfill the firm's duty to manage conflicts and could leave the client without appropriate guidance, potentially harming their financial interests. It also bypasses the firm's internal control mechanisms for handling conflicts. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the firm's code of conduct and relevant regulations. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate steps should be: 1. Identify the potential conflict. 2. Assess its materiality and impact on client interests. 3. Disclose the conflict internally to the designated compliance officer or supervisor. 4. Seek clear instructions on how to proceed, which may involve recusal from the decision, full disclosure to the client, or other mitigation strategies. This structured approach ensures that client interests are protected and regulatory obligations are met. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client who has expressed a strong desire to invest in a highly speculative technology startup has a low risk tolerance and limited financial resources. The advisor's professional judgment suggests this investment is unsuitable. Which of the following actions best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations of a financial advisor in this situation? Option A. Invest the client's funds in the startup, emphasizing the potential for high returns and downplaying the associated risks to satisfy the client's immediate desire. Option B. Advise the client that the startup investment is too risky and refuse to proceed with any recommendation, leaving the client to seek advice elsewhere. Option C. Recommend a diversified portfolio of established companies that aligns with the client's stated risk tolerance and financial capacity, while thoroughly explaining the rationale and potential risks of the startup investment. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, documenting their explicit instruction and waiving the advisor's liability. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, documenting their explicit instruction and waiving the advisor's liability. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly within the regulatory framework governing financial advice. The advisor must navigate the complexities of client suitability, risk tolerance, and the ethical imperative to provide objective, unbiased recommendations, all while adhering to the specific regulations of the AFI Business School entrance exam's jurisdiction. Careful judgment is required to balance client autonomy with regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance, followed by a recommendation that aligns with these factors, even if it deviates from the client's initial, potentially ill-informed preference. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework's emphasis on suitability and the advisor's fiduciary duty. The advisor must educate the client on the rationale behind the recommended course of action, explaining how it best serves their long-term financial well-being and aligns with regulatory requirements for prudent investment. An incorrect approach would be to blindly follow the client's stated preference for a high-risk, speculative investment without conducting a proper suitability assessment. This fails to uphold the advisor's fiduciary duty and violates regulations that mandate recommendations be appropriate for the client's circumstances. Another incorrect approach would be to recommend a product solely because it offers higher commission, regardless of its suitability for the client. This constitutes a conflict of interest and breaches ethical guidelines and regulatory prohibitions against incentivized recommendations that do not prioritize the client's best interests. Finally, avoiding the conversation about suitability and simply documenting the client's request without providing professional guidance would also be an incorrect approach, as it abdicates the advisor's responsibility to provide informed advice and ensure compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's needs and objectives. This is followed by a comprehensive assessment of their financial situation and risk tolerance. Recommendations should then be formulated based on this assessment, with clear communication to the client explaining the rationale and any deviations from their initial requests. Transparency regarding potential conflicts of interest and adherence to all applicable regulatory requirements are paramount throughout the advisory process. Question 14. Operational review demonstrates that the firm's client onboarding process has become increasingly streamlined to accelerate new client acquisition, potentially leading to a reduction in the depth of Know Your Customer (KIC) and anti-money laundering (AML) checks for certain client segments. This has occurred during a period of aggressive business expansion. Considering the regulatory framework governing financial institutions, which of the following represents the most appropriate immediate response to mitigate potential compliance risks? Option A. Increase sales team incentives to further accelerate client acquisition, with the understanding that compliance checks will be addressed in a subsequent, less urgent review cycle. Option B. Maintain the current streamlined onboarding process, assuming that the existing checks are sufficient and that the focus on expansion is paramount for market competitiveness. Option C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive review and enhancement of the client onboarding procedures, with a specific focus on strengthening KYC/AML protocols and implementing risk-based due diligence measures for all client types. Option D. Delegate the task of reviewing the onboarding procedures to the compliance department's junior analysts, with a directive to identify any minor procedural inefficiencies. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive review and enhancement of the client onboarding procedures, with a specific focus on strengthening KYC/AML protocols and implementing risk-based due diligence measures for all client types. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a firm's desire to expand its client base and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. The core tension lies in balancing business growth objectives with the ethical and legal obligations to conduct thorough due diligence and ensure suitability of financial products. A professional must exercise careful judgment to avoid regulatory breaches and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic review of the firm's client onboarding procedures, specifically focusing on the adequacy of Know Your Customer (KIC) and anti-money laundering (AML) checks. This approach is right because it directly addresses the identified operational weakness by seeking to strengthen internal controls and compliance mechanisms. Regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) in the UK, mandate robust KYC/AML processes to prevent financial crime and ensure that clients are suitable for the products and services offered. Implementing enhanced due diligence for high-risk clients and ensuring that all client information is current and accurate are fundamental to these regulations. This approach prioritizes compliance and client protection, aligning with the overarching principles of market conduct and ethical business practices. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing sales targets without addressing the underlying procedural gaps would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from prioritizing commercial objectives over regulatory compliance, potentially leading to the onboarding of unsuitable clients or facilitating illicit financial activities. Such an approach directly contravenes the spirit and letter of regulations designed to safeguard the financial system and investors. Another incorrect approach that involves delegating the review of onboarding procedures to junior staff without adequate oversight or training would also be professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of commitment to compliance and an abdication of responsibility by senior management. It risks superficial reviews that fail to identify critical deficiencies, thereby exposing the firm to regulatory penalties and reputational harm. A third incorrect approach that involves ignoring the operational review findings and continuing with existing practices would be the most egregious failure. This demonstrates a willful disregard for regulatory requirements and ethical obligations, creating significant legal and financial risks for the firm and its clients. It signals a culture that is not conducive to a compliant and trustworthy financial institution. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment of identified operational weaknesses. This includes understanding the potential regulatory, financial, and reputational consequences of inaction. Subsequently, a plan should be developed to implement corrective actions that are aligned with regulatory expectations and ethical standards. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of these corrective actions are crucial to ensure their effectiveness and to adapt to evolving regulatory landscapes. Question 15. When evaluating a client's request to structure a financial arrangement that, while technically legal, appears to exploit a loophole in recent tax legislation to significantly reduce their immediate tax liability, what is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Proceed with the arrangement as requested, but advise the client to seek independent legal counsel to confirm its validity, thereby shifting the primary responsibility for the decision to the client. Option B. Advise the client on the specific loophole and proceed with the arrangement as requested, ensuring all documentation is accurate and compliant with the letter of the law. Option C. Discuss the client's underlying objective for seeking the tax reduction. Explore alternative, more sustainable strategies that achieve similar long-term benefits without relying on legislative loopholes, and clearly outline the potential risks and long-term implications of the requested arrangement, including any potential for future legislative changes or increased scrutiny. Option D. Immediately refuse to engage with the request, citing concerns about the ethical implications of exploiting loopholes, without further discussion or exploration of the client's needs. The correct answer is B. Advise the client on the specific loophole and proceed with the arrangement as requested, ensuring all documentation is accurate and compliant with the letter of the law. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated desires and the potential for those desires to lead to outcomes that are not in their best long-term interest, or that could be perceived as unethical or non-compliant with regulatory expectations. The core difficulty lies in balancing client autonomy with the professional's duty of care and adherence to ethical guidelines. Careful judgment is required to navigate this delicate balance, ensuring that advice provided is both responsible and aligned with professional standards. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the client's objectives, followed by a comprehensive assessment of the associated risks and potential consequences. This includes exploring alternative strategies that might achieve similar outcomes more effectively or with fewer drawbacks. The professional must then clearly communicate these findings to the client, outlining the pros and cons of each option, and providing a reasoned recommendation based on their expertise and understanding of the regulatory landscape. This approach is ethically sound and professionally responsible because it prioritizes informed decision-making by the client, grounded in objective analysis and expert guidance, while upholding the professional's commitment to acting in the client's best interest and adhering to all applicable regulations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on fulfilling the client's immediate request without exploring alternatives or assessing risks fails to meet the professional's duty of care. This can lead to suboptimal outcomes for the client and potentially expose them to unforeseen liabilities or regulatory scrutiny. Such an approach neglects the professional's responsibility to provide comprehensive and insightful advice. Another incorrect approach that involves pressuring the client to accept a particular course of action, even if it is deemed superior by the professional, infringes upon client autonomy. While professionals should guide clients, they must not coerce them into decisions. This can create an adversarial relationship and undermine trust. Finally, an approach that ignores potential regulatory implications or ethical considerations in favor of expediency or client satisfaction is fundamentally flawed. Professionals are bound by a code of conduct and legal frameworks that must be respected. Failure to do so can result in severe professional repercussions and harm to the client. The professional decision-making process in similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the client's stated goals. Second, conduct a thorough analysis of the situation, including identifying all relevant factors, potential risks, and regulatory considerations. Third, explore and evaluate a range of possible solutions, considering their feasibility, effectiveness, and ethical implications. Fourth, present these options to the client in a clear, unbiased manner, explaining the rationale behind each and offering a professional recommendation. Fifth, facilitate the client's decision-making process by answering their questions and ensuring they have a complete understanding of the implications. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that the firm's client onboarding process has been streamlined to accelerate new client acquisition, with a particular emphasis on reducing the time taken for clients identified as low risk. This streamlining has involved reducing the number of verification documents required and shortening the period for internal risk assessment sign-offs. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations for client onboarding and risk management? Option A. Significantly reduce the mandatory verification documents and internal review periods for all new clients, regardless of their perceived risk profile, to maximize onboarding speed. Option B. Delegate the entire due diligence process for all client types, including low-risk ones, to junior compliance officers with minimal senior oversight to increase efficiency. Option C. Continue with the streamlined process, focusing on client self-declarations for low-risk clients and relying on the assumption that their stated information is accurate to expedite onboarding. Option D. Implement a risk-based approach where the depth of due diligence is proportionate to the assessed risk, ensuring that even for low-risk clients, essential verification steps are completed and documented, with clear escalation paths for any anomalies. The correct answer is D. Implement a risk-based approach where the depth of due diligence is proportionate to the assessed risk, ensuring that even for low-risk clients, essential verification steps are completed and documented, with clear escalation paths for any anomalies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a firm's desire to expand its client base and the regulatory imperative to conduct thorough due diligence. The pressure to onboard new clients quickly, especially in a competitive market, can lead to shortcuts that compromise compliance. Professionals must exercise sound judgment to balance business objectives with their fiduciary duties and regulatory obligations, ensuring that growth does not come at the expense of integrity and client protection. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a robust and systematic client onboarding process that prioritizes Know Your Customer (KIC) and anti-money laundering (AML) checks. This aligns with the core principles of regulatory frameworks designed to prevent financial crime and protect the integrity of the financial system. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of regulations that mandate the identification and verification of clients, understanding the nature of their business, and assessing the risks associated with them. This proactive stance ensures that the firm is not inadvertently facilitating illicit activities and maintains its license to operate. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that bypasses or significantly shortens due diligence for clients perceived as low risk is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge that risk assessments are dynamic and that even seemingly low-risk clients can pose significant threats if their circumstances change or if initial assessments were flawed. This approach directly contravenes regulatory requirements for ongoing monitoring and due diligence, potentially exposing the firm to reputational damage and regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on client self-declarations without independent verification. Client input is necessary. It is insufficient on its own. Regulations require firms to take reasonable steps to verify the information provided by clients. Over-reliance on self-declarations creates a significant vulnerability to fraud and misrepresentation, undermining the effectiveness of the firm's compliance program. Finally, an approach that delegates the entire due diligence process to junior staff without adequate oversight or training is also professionally unsound. While delegation is a management tool, compliance responsibilities, particularly those related to KYC/AML, require a high level of expertise and accountability. Inadequate supervision can lead to errors, omissions, and a general lack of understanding of the regulatory nuances, thereby compromising the integrity of the entire process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to client onboarding, where the depth of due diligence is proportionate to the assessed risk. This involves establishing clear internal policies and procedures that are regularly reviewed and updated to reflect evolving regulatory expectations and emerging risks. A strong compliance culture, supported by ongoing training and robust internal controls, is paramount. When faced with pressure to expedite onboarding, professionals must be empowered to escalate concerns and advocate for adherence to compliance protocols, understanding that regulatory breaches can have severe consequences for both the individual and the firm. Question 17. Analysis of a scenario where an applicant for the AFI Business School entrance exam expresses concern that their submitted personal statement might not adequately highlight their leadership potential, and they inquire about the possibility of subtly rephrasing certain experiences to emphasize these qualities more strongly, even if it slightly alters the original narrative's emphasis. The admissions advisor must determine the most appropriate response within the exam's regulatory framework. Option A. Offer to review and edit the personal statement directly to ensure the leadership aspects are sufficiently highlighted, assuming the applicant's intent is genuine. Option B. Suggest the applicant submit a supplementary document detailing additional experiences that demonstrate leadership without altering the original personal statement. Option C. Advise the applicant on how to rephrase their personal statement to more effectively showcase leadership qualities, ensuring the core factual content remains unchanged and the emphasis shift is within the bounds of honest representation, as per the exam's guidelines. Option D. Inform the applicant that the personal statement must reflect their experiences exactly as they occurred, and any attempt to re-emphasize aspects would be considered a violation of the exam's integrity rules. The correct answer is C. Advise the applicant on how to rephrase their personal statement to more effectively showcase leadership qualities, ensuring the core factual content remains unchanged, and the emphasis shift is within the bounds of honest representation, as per the exam's guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated desires and the potential for those desires to lead to regulatory noncompliance or unethical practices. The need for careful judgment arises from the responsibility to act in the client's best interest while upholding professional integrity, and adhering to the regulatory framework of the AFI Business School entrance exam. This requires a nuanced understanding of the rules and a commitment to ethical conduct. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the AFI Business School entrance exam's specific regulations regarding admissions and the ethical guidelines for professional conduct within an academic admissions context. This approach prioritizes transparency, fairness, and adherence to established procedures. It requires the professional to clearly communicate the boundaries of acceptable practice to the applicant, explain the rationale behind these boundaries based on the exam's rules, and offer legitimate, compliant alternatives for strengthening the application. This upholds the integrity of the admissions process and ensures a level playing field for all candidates, aligning with the principles of fairness and due diligence mandated by academic institutions and their governing bodies. An incorrect approach that involves directly facilitating the applicant's request, even if seemingly minor, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This would undermine the integrity of the admissions process by creating an unfair advantage and potentially violating rules against providing preferential treatment or misrepresenting information. Another incorrect approach, such as dismissing the applicant's concerns without explanation or offering vague reassurances, fails to uphold the professional duty of care and transparency. It neglects the opportunity to educate the applicant on the rules and build trust, potentially leading to further misunderstandings or attempts to circumvent regulations. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on the applicant's perceived potential without considering the regulatory framework, demonstrates a disregard for the established rules and the principles of equitable assessment. This can lead to biased decision-making and compromise the credibility of the admissions process. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory framework and ethical codes. Professionals must first identify the core issue and any potential conflicts with these guidelines. They should then engage in open and honest communication with the individual involved, explaining the limitations and the reasons behind them. Offering compliant and ethical alternatives is crucial. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from the relevant governing body or a supervisor is a necessary step to ensure adherence to the rules and maintain professional integrity. Question 18. Quality control measures reveal a pattern of unusually high scores on a specific section of the AFI Business School entrance exam, concentrated among candidates who were tutored by a newly established preparatory course. While the preparatory course is not officially affiliated with the school, anecdotal evidence suggests a strong correlation between attendance at this course and these elevated scores. The exam committee needs to determine the appropriate course of action. Option A. Immediately disqualify all candidates who attended the preparatory course, citing a potential breach of exam integrity. Option B. Issue a public statement acknowledging the observed score anomaly and assuring candidates that the integrity of the exam is paramount, without detailing specific actions being taken. Option C. Advise the preparatory course to voluntarily adjust its curriculum to remove any potentially sensitive material, assuming the anomaly is due to effective, albeit coincidental, preparation. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the exam section in question, including its design, scoring, and administration, to identify any potential vulnerabilities or biases that may have been exploited. Simultaneously, investigate the preparatory course's curriculum and teaching methods for any evidence of inappropriate content or coaching that directly targets exam questions. Correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the exam section in question, including its design, scoring, and administration, to identify any potential vulnerabilities or biases that may have been exploited. Simultaneously, investigate the preparatory course's curriculum and teaching methods for any evidence of inappropriate content or coaching that directly targets exam questions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining academic integrity and the pressure to achieve positive outcomes for the institution. The AFI Business School entrance exam's regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines likely emphasize fairness, transparency, and the accurate assessment of candidate potential. The quality control measures have uncovered a potential deviation from these principles, requiring careful judgment to address the situation without compromising the exam's validity or the school's reputation. The correct approach involves a thorough, impartial investigation into the identified quality control anomalies. This means gathering all relevant data, interviewing involved parties, if appropriate and within ethical guidelines, and objectively assessing whether the anomalies represent systemic issues, isolated incidents, or potential misconduct. The justification for this approach lies in upholding the core principles of academic assessment: fairness to all candidates, ensuring the exam accurately reflects candidate abilities, and maintaining the credibility of the AFI business school. Adhering to established internal policies and any external regulatory guidelines governing academic admissions and assessment is paramount. This methodical process ensures that any corrective actions taken are evidence-based and proportionate. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings without proper investigation. This fails to address potential breaches of academic integrity and could allow systemic issues to persist, undermining the fairness of future exams. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately implement punitive measures without a thorough investigation. This risks unfairly penalizing individuals or departments and could lead to reputational damage if the initial findings are misinterpreted or incomplete. A third incorrect approach would be to attempt to conceal the findings. This is ethically reprehensible and likely violates regulatory requirements for transparency and accountability in academic institutions. Such concealment would not only be a breach of trust, but could also expose the institution to significant legal and reputational risks if discovered. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. This typically involves 1. Acknowledging and documenting the issue. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 3. Initiating a fact-finding investigation. 4. Analyzing the evidence objectively. 5. Determining appropriate actions based on findings and regulations. 6. Implementing actions and monitoring their effectiveness. 7. Communicating outcomes transparently where appropriate and permissible. This framework ensures that decisions are grounded in evidence, aligned with ethical standards, and compliant with all applicable rules. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a client, Mr. Harrison, has expressed a strong desire to invest a significant portion of his portfolio in a single, highly speculative technology stock that he has read about online. Mr. Harrison is nearing retirement and has a moderate risk tolerance, as previously assessed. You have conducted your due diligence and believe this investment is highly unsuitable given his risk profile and proximity to retirement. How should you proceed? Option A. Explain to Mr. Harrison the risks associated with such a concentrated and speculative investment, detailing how it conflicts with his stated risk tolerance and retirement goals, and propose alternative diversified strategies that align with his profile, while respecting his ultimate decision after full disclosure. Option B. Advise Mr. Harrison that his request is ill-advised and refuse to implement the investment, insisting on a more conservative, diversified portfolio without further discussion. Option C. Proceed with the investment as requested by Mr. Harrison, as his instructions are paramount and fulfilling client requests is the primary objective. Option D. Invest a small token amount in the speculative stock to appease Mr. Harrison, while allocating the majority of his portfolio to a diversified strategy, without fully explaining the rationale for the token investment. Correct answer is A. Explain to Mr. Harrison the risks associated with such a concentrated and speculative investment, detailing how it conflicts with his stated risk tolerance and retirement goals, and propose alternative diversified strategies that align with his profile, while respecting his ultimate decision after full disclosure. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the potential for those preferences to lead to suboptimal or even detrimental outcomes, particularly in the context of financial advice. The need for careful judgment arises from the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, which may necessitate challenging the client's assumptions or desires if they are not aligned with sound financial principles or regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, followed by a clear and transparent explanation of the rationale behind recommended strategies. This approach prioritizes client education and informed consent, ensuring that the client understands the implications of their decisions. Specifically, it requires the advisor to 1. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial profile. 2. Explain the risks and benefits of various investment options in plain language. And 3. Document the client's decision-making process and the advisor's recommendations. This aligns with the principles of client-centric advice and the regulatory expectation of suitability, ensuring that recommendations are appropriate for the individual client's circumstances. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on fulfilling the client's immediate, potentially ill-informed request without adequate due diligence or explanation fails to uphold the advisor's professional responsibilities. This could lead to regulatory breaches if the recommended course of action is unsuitable, or if the client later claims they were not fully informed of the risks. Another incorrect approach, which involves dismissing the client's concerns outright and imposing a rigid, predetermined strategy, demonstrates a lack of empathy and a failure to engage in a collaborative advisory process. This can erode client trust and may also be viewed as a failure to adequately consider the client's stated objectives, even if those objectives are not fully aligned with optimal financial outcomes. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, actively listen to and understand the client's stated desires and underlying concerns. Second, conduct a comprehensive analysis of the client's financial situation and objectives. Third, identify any discrepancies between the client's desires and what constitutes sound financial advice or regulatory compliance. Fourth, clearly and empathetically communicate the findings, explaining the rationale behind any recommended deviations from the client's initial request, including potential risks and benefits. Fifth, document all discussions, recommendations, and the client's final decisions. This process ensures that advice is both client-focused and professionally responsible. Question 20. Research into the ethical considerations and regulatory compliance for financial advisory services within the AFI Business School's jurisdiction reveals a client expressing a strong desire to present their investment portfolio in a manner that exaggerates its short-term performance to potential investors, even if it means selectively highlighting favorable data points and omitting less impressive ones. As a financial advisor operating under the AFI Business School's regulatory framework, which of the following actions best reflects professional responsibility? Option A. Suggest to the client that they engage a third-party marketing firm to create the presentation, thereby distancing the advisory firm from the potentially misleading content. Option B. Inform the client that such a presentation is not possible and refuse to engage further with the client on this matter without offering any alternative solutions or explanations. Option C. Advise the client that, while the desire to present a positive image is understandable, the selective presentation of data and omission of unfavorable information would constitute a misrepresentation, violating regulatory guidelines on fair dealing and transparency. Instead, propose developing a comprehensive and accurate report that contextualizes performance, highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement, and exploring compliant methods for emphasizing positive aspects without misleading. Option D. Proceed with creating the presentation as requested by the client, focusing on compiling only the most impressive performance figures and omitting any data that might detract from the desired narrative, assuming the client understands the implications. The correct answer is C. Advise the client that, while the desire to present a positive image is understandable, the selective presentation of data and omission of unfavorable information would constitute a misrepresentation, violating regulatory guidelines on fair dealing and transparency. Instead, propose developing a comprehensive and accurate report that contextualizes performance, highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement, and exploring compliant methods for emphasizing positive aspects without misleading. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated desires and the potential for those desires to lead to regulatory noncompliance or unethical practices. The need for careful judgment arises from the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest while upholding professional standards and adhering to the regulatory framework of the AFI Business School's jurisdiction. The advisor must navigate the client's immediate goals with the long-term implications and legal boundaries. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the client's objectives, followed by a clear explanation of the regulatory limitations and ethical considerations that prevent the direct fulfillment of the request. This approach prioritizes transparency, education, and the exploration of alternative compliance strategies. It demonstrates professional integrity by refusing to engage in or facilitate actions that could be construed as misleading or in violation of established guidelines. The regulatory justification lies in the advisor's obligation to adhere to the principles of responsible financial advice and to avoid aiding and abetting any form of regulatory breach. Ethically, it aligns with the duty of care and the principle of acting with honesty and integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on fulfilling the client's request without regard for regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the governing laws and guidelines, potentially exposing both the client and the advisor to legal repercussions and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves subtly circumventing regulations through complex, opaque structures, is also ethically flawed. While it might appear to meet the letter of the request, it violates the spirit of the regulations and can be seen as an attempt to mislead or deceive. This undermines trust and professional credibility. A third incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the client's request outright without offering any constructive alternatives or explanations, is professionally suboptimal. While it avoids regulatory breach, it fails to demonstrate a commitment to client service and problem solving, potentially alienating the client and missing opportunities to guide them towards compliant solutions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, fully understand the client's underlying needs and objectives. Second, assess these objectives against the relevant regulatory framework and ethical principles. Third, clearly communicate any identified conflicts or limitations to the client, explaining the rationale. Fourth, collaboratively explore and propose alternative compliance strategies that still aim to meet the client's core needs. And finally, document all discussions and decisions thoroughly.